Substitute, Episode 4. Imue's house was a detached story building in the serene Uduak in Port Harcourt. That afternoon, she sat looking through piles of pictures with Austin. Each picture was a reference point to a larger story about previous occurrences in Imue and Paul's lives, and she saw it as a good way to bring Austin up to speed. Imue's life was not void of challenges. She had faced the stigma of teenage pregnancy and the struggles of being a single mom in the late 80s. She moved from Ogara to the steel factory in Warri when she was 22 and married a 56-year-old German widower whom she met at work. When her husband died of a heart attack 5 years later, she moved from Warri to Port Harcourt and trained Paul through school with the tangible inheritance he left for them. She now ran a drink distribution business and relied on the massive sales turnover model to make profits. Imue flashed a picture. Paul looked younger and immaculately dressed in a white round neck t-shirt over a pair of brown khaki trousers. Your brother took this picture during his first year in the agency. How long has Paul been in the agency? Austin asked. 15 years, Imue replied. He has a master's degree in criminology. He came back home after studying in England because his dream was to tackle the illegal drug business in Nigeria, Imue said as she continued to flip through the pile of pictures. Austin saw Paul's teenage pictures, those taken during his days in the university, especially in the UK, and others during his early days at the agency. He always looked gallantly dressed in his brown khaki uniform. His twin brother's achievements made Austin think twice about his own choices. It was not worth it to continue indulging in drug dealing when there were several other legitimate things that he could do. His conscience pricked him, and he secretly wished he had made better choices. Austin held one particular picture closer so he could get a better view. Paul was standing close to another young man who looked a bit shorter. "Who is this?" Austin asked. Imue leaned forward. "That's Edet. He was Paul's best friend. They joined the agency the same year and became like brothers." Imue sighed. "He was murdered 2 years ago during a raid with some drug dealers." Austin raised his brow. He could remember Paul mentioned it. Were they together when it happened? Paul was in Enugu at the time. Imue replied. "We heard they shot him several times in the head," Imue recounted. It was on a Sunday morning. She had been on her way to church when her phone rang and Paul was sobbing as he broke the news. His friend had been murdered in cold blood by some drug dealers. After that, Edet's death left a void in Paul's life and she knew her son was still recovering. Imue placed a passport photograph in Austin's hand. "You can keep this." It was a photo of Paul in his work uniform and Austin slipped it into his breast pocket. "God has a way of doing things, and I believe you have come into our lives at a perfect time." Imue's tone was optimistic as she began to plead. "Please do not go back to Lagos." She said, "Paul needs you and I need you too." Although Austin was touched by her warmth, he did not think he would ever have the courage to tell to Chinedu that he would not be coming back to Lagos. "You can consider school here or better still start a business. I just don't want you to be far from me anymore." "I'll think about it," Austin said as they embraced. Paul walked in and cleared his throat. "Paul, darling." Imue reached out as he drew closer and shared in their embrace. "I never thought it would be possible to hold my two sons in my arms," she said. "Don't get all teary now, Mama." Paul had seen her cry more in the last couple of days than he had seen all his life. He turned to Austin. "I was hoping we could grab some drinks." "Cool." Austin loved the way they all worked together to reunite as a family. This trip was proving to be far more fruitful than he had predicted it would be. "Why does everything have to be this stressful?" Lara shook her head and covered her face with one hand as 10 ladies filed in and out of her sewing room. So far, the girls were too short and their statistics were wrong. She expressed the same dissatisfaction during her previous meeting with Mr. Timmy, her PR consultant, so he quickly organized another set of models. But they were also walking disasters. "Where did you get these girls from?" Lara asked. Mr. Timmy pulled back his lips. His horrid dentition refused to give way to a decent smile. "They are professional models. A few of them have done some calendar adverts in the past," he explained. "Why in heaven's name did you shortlist calendar models for me?" Lara clenched her fist. The tension between herself and Paul, coupled with the stress of planning a fashion show, caused tightness in her throat. More so, this guy was standing on her last nerve. "I'm sorry, but I thought we discussed..." "What did we discuss?" Lara barked, and he recoiled. "I'm putting out a fashion show and I need models that can walk the runway. Models to showcase my pieces." "Okay." Timmy nodded and to Lara's amazement began to scribble some notes in his diary. Lara wondered where Emanuela got him from. It occurred to her that probably Timmy was not who he portrayed himself to be. He was probably a weedhead just like her boyfriend, Chidi. The guy understood nothing, and talking to him was like singing a sonorous song to a deaf man. "Mr. Timmy, if you are truly an event planner or PR consultant, then I don't think you need a magic wand to know the kind of models needed for this project. How can I trust you with the rest of the event when you can't even provide me with the necessary resources?" she asked as she watched him glance at Emanuela and back to her. "Please, give me more time. I will tidy this up," he pleaded. "That's the problem. We don't have time." One of her staff walked in at that point. "Sorry to disturb, but Mr. Harrison is here." "Thank you, Grace." Lara was not expecting Paul, but the thought of having him around made her feel lighter and gave her a good reason to leave Emanuela in the room with her con artist. "I have to go." She shut her notebook and headed for the door. Mr. Timmy was saying something, but Lara didn't look back. Lara met Austin and Paul in her office. "Hi." She kissed Paul and embraced Austin. "Austin and I went for a drink, so we stopped by because I had to see you." Lara started to wonder if Austin sold the idea to him, because Paul rarely showed remorse after a disagreement. Their many disagreements just seemed to fizzle out, with no resolution, but Lara loved him too much to complain. "We ran into your friend," Paul said. "Who?" "The chubby one. What's her name?" "Ibier," Lara said. It had to be because Ibier was Lara's only chubby friend. "You should have seen the shock on her face when she saw us both," Paul laughed. "Everyone is trying to get used to the fact that you have a twin." "I guess so." Paul looked at Austin and they smiled. Lara brought out 2 cans of beer from her fridge as Paul began to rub his neck. He had something to say, but he wasn't sure if it was the right time. The fashion show clearly meant a lot to Lara, and she seemed stressed out already, so he did not want to add to her worries. "My meeting was a complete disaster. The PR guy gathered a bunch of girls with wrong statistics," Lara hissed. "I thought you had fired that guy," Paul said. "I wish I had. He is so slow and gets no details correct. It's less than 3 weeks to the show and nothing is in place. No publicity, no models. We have done nothing about the venue, and I still have some pieces to finish up." Lara exhaled. "How many models do you need?" Austin asked. Lara's brow furrowed, but Austin repeated his question. "How many models do you need for the show?" "I'm showcasing 45 pieces. I was thinking of having 15 models so they can change 3 times each," she said. "Why don't you go scouting for your models by yourself?" Austin's next question was so unexpected that Lara and Paul gave him a questioning look. "There are over 5 higher institutions in this city. You can go scouting for young ladies that meet your requirements, or you may put up posters in those schools and call for auditions." He said it calmly, but it made a lot of sense that Lara wondered why she hadn't considered it earlier. "Wow!" she exclaimed. For publicity, you can buy advert spaces on social media platforms and run a print campaign all at once. Austin continued to fire on with ideas. It seems Austin is the event planner you've been searching for, Paul joked, and they laughed. Thanks, Austin! Lara's face brightened as she picked her intercom and dialed Emanuela. As soon as Emanuela comes, we will get all the details and start. I hope you don't mind spending more time with us? Not at all. Austin shook his head. Lara stretched her hand across the table and placed it on Paul's. Paul D, would you like to try out your outfit for the show? She asked. Paul began to mumble some words. About that, I've been meaning to tell you something. His voice was low, and Lara was quick to decode his body language, but she didn't want to jump into any conclusions. I may be out of town for a while. Something came up, and I need to go for an impromptu assignment, he said. His announcement made Lara deflate like a balloon. She just sat there staring like a little girl who had been denied her favorite toy. Paul, but you promised. She couldn't hide her disappointment even if she tried. I know, baby. It's just that we received some information that requires my team and I to travel. I'm so sorry. How long will you be gone? 3 weeks, Paul replied. 3 weeks? It may be shorter, it may be longer. You know how these things play out, Paul explained. Lara knew there was no reason to whine, especially when it was evident that Paul would always put his work first. Besides, she had suffered enough disappointment for one day, so she simply shook her head and gathered her documents on the table into a pile. Austin sought to break free from the awkwardness in the room. He did not like to be around the two of them during a disagreement, and it was now obvious that it happened often. He was relieved when Emanuela walked into the office. You sent for me? We need to re-strategize. Lara rose and turned to Austin. Shall we? Sure. Austin stood as the three of them moved towards the door, but Paul grabbed Lara and held her back. Please, not now. I beg you. Lara had neither the strength nor the time to pick a quarrel, but Paul's eyes were pleading. He shut the door, so the two of them remained in her office. Baby, try to understand, he said. Why can't you try to be less self-centered for once? Lara retorted. I sacrifice so much to keep this relationship afloat, but for you, it always has to be about your job. She poured out her frustration while he continued to apologize. These things just come up, and when they do, someone has to attend to them, but I promise to make it up. He said, it's my first fashion show, and it's a big deal for me. All I ask is for you to be there for me. She tapped his chest as she spoke. Austin can fill in for me? Paul suggested. Fill in for you. He's already getting involved. I'm sure he'll be willing to help in any other way. As Paul spoke, his hands caressed her soft cheeks. I'll be back soon. You will have many more shows and I will never miss them. He planted a kiss on her lips. When Lara joined Austin and Emanuela, they had already outlined some plans and strategies on how to proceed come the following Monday. Austin was hands-on. He seemed to have brilliant ideas and clear-cut steps to adopt, and it was obvious he had done this before. Although the meeting was brief, it was long enough to get them fired up with expectations. It was also reassuring to know that Austin would come around often to guide them until the big day. Later that evening, as Lara worked on a few sketches, Emanuela met her in the sewing room. She was full of apologies over Mr. Timmy, but Lara wove it off. At least they had a better alternative in Austin. Emanuela leaned by the sewing table for some minutes, but the only sound in the room came from the television. I like twins a lot, she began, as Lara watched her chatter. We have 2 sets of twins in my family. Do you know that if you marry Paul, your chances of having a set of twins would be high? She asked. As much as Lara wished it upon herself, She had to wait for Paul to propose, and that was what enthusiasts like Emanuela did not understand. "What about you? Are you having twins?" Lara asked as Emanuela's face flushed. What Emanuela did not realize was that Lara had noticed the changes in her body over the last few weeks. "There's nothing to be ashamed of because you know I would never judge you," Lara continued to sketch. Emanuela was in her mid-20s and had worked with Lara since the inception of her business. Dependable and vivacious was how one would describe Emanuela, and with a voice that chirped like a bird. Lara was shocked when she found out about the pregnancy, but Emanuela's choices were up to her. "Is Chidi responsible?" "Yes." Emanuela's gaze fell. Lara had met Chidi once or twice. He always showed up with a pretentious smile, and she was convinced that he was up to no good. Perhaps Emanuela was too much for him because at 39 he was jobless, frivolous, and practically lived off Emanuela and his parents. Despite his age, he dressed like a rebellious teenager in saggy clothes and carried unkempt dreadlocks with multiple tattoos. Lara could tell she was embarrassed, but she kept at it. "The same one you broke up with for his drug addiction?" Lara asked as Emanuela dived into his defense. "He is taking bold steps to be a better person. And the pregnancy came suddenly, so we've decided to keep it, but I promise I will not let it affect my work," Emanuela said. "Of course I know you won't." Lara was convinced Emanuela's work would not suffer because of the pregnancy, so that did not bother her. What bothered her was Emanuela's overall well-being. "I hope you know what you are doing?" Lara was concerned. "Yes." "Okay." Lara finally let out a soft smile. Paul left for his special assignment the following week, but Lara was too busy to sit around and feel sorry for herself. Austin came around more often and blended with her key staff. They would spend the mornings going over updates on venue, makeup artists, models, set fabricators, sound engineering, and advertorial plans. Thereafter, Lara stayed back to work on her designs and supervise her fashion pieces. Once during lunch, Austin told her more about his upbringing and how he worked to push through every phase in his life. Paul definitely had a better story to tell, especially as he always had everything working for him. His achievements far outweighed Austin's, but she was sure that never made Austin bitter. The interesting detail was that despite all Austin had been through, he approached life with a better outlook. Compared to Paul, he was extremely positive, and it was refreshing to be around him. A day before her fashion show, Lara drove down to Imi's house to drop Austin's new attire. It was something her staff put together in appreciation for his kindness, and she hoped he would like it. Her phone rang, and she reached for it. It was Davidson, her father's personal assistant, and he called to inform her that her father was already in town for her fashion show. "Thank you, Davidson. Tell Daddy I'll be at the house tomorrow morning." Her father was a retired administrator in one of the federal ministries, and his recent responsibility as the head of the Drug Enforcement Agency was quite tasking. Some staff in the agency who believed he wasn't doing well wrote a petition against him, and it hurt her to watch the media rip him apart. Yet she was overjoyed that he found time to come into town for her first fashion show. As Lara pulled her car to a halt in front of Imoe's house, her phone beeped. This time it was a Facebook request. "Did you just send me a Facebook friend request?" Lara asked as she stepped into Imoe's living room. "I have been upgraded to the 21st century. Thanks to Austin, who is showing me the way around this thing called Facebook." Imoe turned to Austin. "Look for Paul's profile for me and let's invite him. I am sure he will be surprised too." "I don't think Paul is active on Facebook," Lara chipped in. "He would probably respond after 6 months." Let me fetch my address book," Imoe announced as she rose. "How's the preparation for your fashion show?" she asked Lara. "It's going well. Austin has been extremely helpful. Lara replied. Austin is like an angel, Imwe added. The obvious bond between mother and son was remarkable, and it made Lara's heart melt. This was the same person who usually withdrew whenever Paul went away on official assignments, but this time around, she did not even look like she missed Paul. Lara also did not know what she would have done without Austin's timely intervention in planning her event. He came up with brilliant and astounding ideas and made everything look simple. My father is in town, Lara started to say when they were alone in the room. That's amazing. I'm so happy, she giggled, and Austin could see it meant so much to her to have her father support her. He glanced around and asked, Hey, I made some goat meat pepper soup. I didn't know you can cook, Lara said. Been cooking since I was 9, but I try not to blow my trumpet, he said. And they laughed. You should taste it, he pressed further, and Lara was tempted, yet she declined and handed the Laraboko carrier bag in her possession to him. I brought you a gift from the house. Thanks, Austin said, as he pulled a packaged traditional attire. How did you know brown is my best color? Her kind gesture left him astonished. Brown is Paul's best color, so yes, I guessed right. They laughed. Thanks, I appreciate this, he said as he spread out the cloth. I should be the one thanking you. You have been so kind to me throughout this period, and I don't know what I would have done without you. I'm glad I can help, Austin said. His smile stimulated an unexpected rush of warmth. Imwe was descending the stairs. Don't bother calling the mechanic. Austin fixed it. It seemed she was talking to Paul. The delivery van works fine now. She handed the phone over to Austin, who assured Paul that things were all right in the home front. When Austin saw her off to her car, he told her he planned to get to the venue of the fashion show early, just to be sure everything was fine, especially with the stage setting and lighting. I would appreciate that, Lara said. Austin noticed the bags underneath her eyes. Doesn't look like you've had much sleep, he said. I feel like a walking zombie. Can't wait for tomorrow to come. She had eaten no proper food in days, just living off coffee and chocolate bars in order to meet deadlines. Yet she could not bring herself to ask Austin for that pepper soup, even though she longed to taste it. Austin opened her car door and she hopped in. See you tomorrow and thank you so much. God knows I can't thank you enough, Lara said. No worries, he replied. Lara's father's house was a white Georgian-style one-story building located among similar residential clusters in the highbrow Old Gare. It had a symmetrical facade, several double-hung windows and paneled doors with bold geometric floor pattern. Soft pastel colors accentuated the interior decor, and the open floor plan included a dining area, family room and 4 bedrooms. The garden was a tranquil scene. It was one part of the house where one could relax to get rid of stress as the delightful smell of fresh orchids wafted through the air. Lara's fondest memories of that part of the house was dressing up her sisters in different clothes and having them walk through the length and breadth of the garden. Fortunately, her dreams had come true and she would have her first public fashion show in a few hours. Lara met her father reading through the morning papers at his outdoor coffee table, and she hugged him from behind, wrapping her hands around his bald scalp. Thank you so much, Daddy. I couldn't have achieved this without your support. I'm happy you are glad. Her father had always been cheerful, but she noticed his face expressed some thoughtfulness that morning. Is everything okay, Daddy? Just some work pressures. She could tell the petition bothered him because it meant that his subordinates did not have faith in him as the chairman of the agency. Wariboko leaned closer. Drug crime is on the rise. Notorious drug lords continue to use the West African countries as a transit, and I receive endless calls from the authorities to revamp my agency before I lose the war. He poured out and sighed. She recalled Paul's constant frustration and knew this was her opportunity to speak up. You heard about the petition, didn't you? He asked, and Lara nodded. According to the media, a good number of staff who felt her father was incompetent signed it. She reached for her father's hand and patted it. Dad, you may not understand the dynamics of the agency because you didn't rise through the ranks, but you can make conscious efforts to know their major challenges, Lara said. I do. Wariboko's eyes narrowed. I believe you have strong, dedicated staff, but if you do not equip them or their welfare is shabby, they will wear out, Lara said. The rot in the agency did not start under my watch, but I feel like I need to make my mark, her father replied. For starters, the supplementary budget needs to be passed so that you can begin some infrastructural work and purchase specialized equipment for the agency. As Lara spoke, her father wondered how she addressed the issue with so much understanding. You're right, my dear, but the judiciary is another big challenge, he noted. Why don't you lobby the lawmakers before the bill is read in the House? If the bill is sponsored and they pass a favorable law, then there can be a total makeover in the agency, Lara suggested. She knew her father had good intentions, but the pressures and demands of the job seemed to overwhelm him. Daddy, please do something, she pleaded. I will! Her father nodded. It had been a while since Wariboko opened up to his favorite daughter, and it felt good because she was always attentive, but this time around, she came up with excellent ideas he could apply to his job. He was having an important meeting with the zonal directors in Abuja the day after, so rather than reprimand them, Wariboko intended to pick their brains regarding how to move the agency forward. Tola Wariboko emerged from the house, pacing towards them in her usual graceful steps as Lara leaned in to kiss her father on the cheek. Aren't you staying for breakfast? Her mother asked. No, I came to drop off your VIP tickets. Lara took turns to embrace her parents before leaving. When Lara left, Wariboko mentioned his conversation with Lara to his wife. That girl is full of wisdom. She sat me down and lectured me on my job. She told me she is in love with one of your men at the agency. One of my staff, Wariboko queried, his mouth agape. That's what she told me. His wife shrugged as she lifted a newspaper. The back trail leading to the property was a lonely bush path. Leaves rustled in the morning breeze and crunched beneath his feet. From where he stood, he saw his men lead the handcuffed suspects towards a vehicle. While some resisted, others were quiet and submissive. Move! One of Paul's men barked. It didn't matter what attitude they displayed, their time was up.
Thanks for watching. This story was written by Uduak, Edet and produced by Tconcepts.